again for the third and last part of our session, where we explore the life and ministry of Jesus Christ through the lens of history and archaeology. Archaeology. Over the next few minutes, we will be journeying through two key chapters of his story: his trial, crucifixion, and burial, tomb and resurrection. Along the way, we will see how archaeological discoveries and historical evidence align with the biblical accounts, offering us a deeper understanding of the world Jesus lived in and the timeless truth he taught. I hope this discussion or this session will inspire and enlighten you. So let's start. So for this session, we will start with chapter 7, which is the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. This chapter explores one of the most important events in Christian history: the trial, crucifixion, and burial of Jesus. It combines stories from the Bible, historical records, and archaeological discoveries to give us a deeper understanding of what happened during this time. The events are set in the context of the political and religious tensions in Judea, which was under Roman rule in the first century. The story begins with Jesus being arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, a place just outside of Jerusalem. After his arrest, Jesus was taken to face a series of trials. First, he was brought before Jewish religious leaders, including Annas and Caiaphas, who were high priests. These leaders accused Jesus of several crimes, such as blasphemy, speaking against God, sorcery, using magic, and causing trouble among the people by claiming to be the Messiah or King of the Jews. However, the Jewish leaders did not have the authority to execute anyone, so they sent Jesus to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, to decide his faith, his fate. Pontius Pilate was the Roman ruler of Judea at that time, and when Jesus was brought before him, Pilate did not think Jesus was guilty of any serious crime. He even tried to find a way to release Jesus, but the Jewish leaders insisted that Jesus was a threat to Roman authority. They warned Pilate that if he let Jesus go, he would be seen as disloyal to the Roman Emperor Tiberius. Pilate was afraid of causing a rebellion or losing his position, so he agreed to have Jesus crucified, even though he believed Jesus was innocent. To understand this story better, archaeologists have studied the places and objects from that time. For example, excavations in Jerusalem have uncovered large, luxurious houses that may have belonged to the high priests like Caiaphas. These houses had ritual baths, stone jars, and other items used for religious ceremonies. These discoveries help us imagine what the homes of the high priests looked like and how they lived. Another important discovery is the James ossuary, a stone box used to hold bones. It has an inscription that says, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Some scholars believe this could be a reference to Jesus of Nazareth and his family, though there is still debate about its authenticity. If it is genuine, it would be one of the earliest physical references to Jesus outside the Bible. Crucifixion was a common form of execution used by the Romans. It was a very painful and public way to punish criminals, rebels, and slaves. The process was designed to humiliate the person and scare others from breaking the law. Jesus was beaten, forced to carry a heavy wooden cross, and then nailed to it. He was crucified at a place called Golgotha, which was outside the walls of Jerusalem. Two other criminals were crucified alongside him. Archaeologists have found evidence of Roman crucifixions, including the bones of a man named Johanan, and his remains show that nails were driven through his wrists and heels, which matches the way Jesus was crucified. These discoveries help to us understand how brutal crucifixion was and confirm the historical accuracy of the Bible's description. The pain and suffering Jesus endured were very real, and these findings remind us of the harsh realities of that time. The traditional location of Golgotha is near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Archaeological findings, such as ancient tombs and a gate called the Garden Gate, support this location. Some people have suggested other possible sites like Gordon's Calvary, but there's not enough evidence to prove these alternatives. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre had been a place of Christian worship for centuries, and many believe it marks the actual site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. Most scholars believe that Jesus was crucified in the year of AD 33. This date is based on historical records, astronomical calculations, and the political situation at the time. Pontius Pilate was trying to keep peace in Judea while also staying in favor with the Roman emperor. The recent execution of Pilate's political ally, Sejanus, made Pilate even more cautious about upsetting the emperor. This political pressure likely influenced Pilate's decision to crucify Jesus, even though he knew Jesus was innocent. After Jesus died, his body was taken down from the cross and buried in a tomb near Golgotha. This tomb is now inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Bible describes it as a new tomb, and archaeological evidence supports the idea that this area was used for burials during the first century. The tomb was cut into rock, and a large stone wall was rolled in front of it to seal it. This matches the description of the Gospels, which say that Jesus was buried in a tomb owned by a man named Joseph of Arimathea. The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most important events in Christian history. It is not only a story of suffering and death, but also a story of hope and redemption. Christians believe that Jesus' death on the cross was a sacrifice for the sins of humanity, and his resurrection 3 days later is the foundation of their faith. This chapter helps us to see the events of Jesus' trial, crucifixion, and burial in their historical context. It shows how political and religious tensions played a role in these events and helps us understand why they happened the way they did. By combining the Bible's accounts with historical records and archaeological evidence, we can better appreciate the significance of these events and their impact on the world. Chapter 8 concerns the burial, tomb, and resurrection of Jesus. And this chapter delves into the events surrounding the burial, tomb, and resurrection of Jesus, drawing from a biblical accounts, historical records, and archaeological evidence. It provides a detailed exploration of burial practices of the first century Judea, the tomb of Jesus, and the historical and theological significance of the resurrection. After the crucifixion of Jesus, his body was placed in a tomb according to the burial customs of Judea during the Roman period. The Mosaic law required that a body be buried on the same day as death, especially before the start of the Sabbath or a religious festival like Passover. In first century Judea, the typical burial practices involved washing and anointing the body with oils, wrapping it in a linen shroud, and placing it in a tomb. Wealthier families often use rock-cut tombs, while those of lesser means were buried in simple pit or trench graves. Archaeological discoveries in Jerusalem have revealed many rock-cut tombs from the 1st century BC to AD 70. These tombs were usually carved into limestone and featured a central chamber with burial benches or niches called luculi for multiple family members. The tombs were sealed with large rolling stones, and some contained ossuaries, stone boxes used for secondary burial after the flesh had decayed. Ossuaries were a common practice in Judea during this period, and many were inscribed with the names of the deceased. The tomb of Jesus, however, was described as a new tomb, hewn out of rock and provided by Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin. This tomb was a single chambered and sealed with a large stone consistent with the type of tombs found in the Jerusalem area during the Roman period. When Jesus was buried, his body was wrapped in a linen shroud, as was customary. Archaeological evidence from the tomb of the shroud in the Akeldama area south of Jerusalem confirms that burial shrouds were used in 1st century Judea. This tomb contained the remains of an adult male wrapped in a burial cloth along with a separate face cloth. The Shroud of Turin, a famous and mysterious linen cloth, has been the subject of much debate. The shroud bears the image of a man who appears to have been crucified, with wounds consistent with the gospel accounts of Jesus' crucifixion. However, the shroud's origins are uncertain. Radiocarbon dating in 1988 suggested it dated to the medieval period, but some scholars argue that the tested sample may have been contaminated or repaired, leaving the possibility of an earlier date open. Pollen samples and chemical analysis of dirt particles on the shroud suggest a Middle Eastern origin, possibly from Judea. While the Shroud of Turin remains enigmatic, it has sparked significant interest due to its potential connection to Jesus' burial. However, the Gospels mention a separate face cloth, which is not present with the Shroud of Turin, leading some to question its authenticity as Jesus' burial shroud. But regarding the Shroud of Turin, there was a study made a couple of years ago, and it sparked significant interest to the shroud again because they found significant and interesting things to report. But due to time constraints, we will only look at a few points. The first point is the weave tension. It has been discovered that in the shroud of Turin, every warp thread stretched lengthwise on the loom skips over three crosswise weft threads and disappears under the fourth one. This weaving technique, is, as historical evidence shows, was common between 100 years before and 100 years after Christ. This proved that the shroud truly dates back to the time of Jesus. Additionally, based on the imprint on the shroud, it has been determined that the person had a height of 1.76 to 1.78 meters, a weight of 76 to 78 kilograms, and was between 30 and 35 years old. It is also now known that the man on the shroud had blood type AB. Furthermore, the imprint was not caused by blood, but by an extremely intense light, the light of resurrection. Moreover, it can be seen that the thumbs are missing from the imprint. This is because when Jesus was crucified, the nails were driven through the wrist, piercing the median nerve. This caused the thumbs to retract, making them invincible in the imprint. This is not only proves that the holistic authenticity of the shroud, but also confirms that the imprint belongs to a crucified person. According to the Gospels, Jesus was buried in a new tomb provided by Joseph of Arimathea. The tomb was located outside the city walls of Jerusalem, hewn out of rock and sealed with a large stone. After Jesus' body was placed in the tomb, Roman guards were stationed outside to prevent anyone from stealing the body. The traditional site of Jesus' tomb is within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. This site has been venerated by Christians since the 4th century, when Emperor Constantine ordered the construction of a church over the tomb. Archaeological excavations beneath the church have revealed remnants of a 1st century tomb consistent exactly with the Gospel descriptions. The tomb was likely covered by a Roman temple to Venus or Jupiter, built by Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century, which was later dismantled by Constantine. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre also houses the traditional site of Golgotha, the place of Jesus' crucifixion. The proximity of the tomb and Golgotha aligns with the Gospel accounts perfectly, which describe both locations as being in the same general area. The resurrection of Jesus is the central event of Christian faith, and it is recorded in all four Gospels, as well as in the writings of St. Paul and other early Christian authors. According to the Gospels, on the third day after his burial, Jesus rose from the dead, leaving the tomb empty. He then appeared to his disciples and many others over a period of 40 days before ascending to heaven. And one time he appeared to over 500 people at the same time. The empty tomb is a key element of the resurrection narrative. The Gospels state that when the tomb who followed Jesus went to the tomb, when the women who followed Jesus went to the tomb on the third day, they found the stone rolled away and the tomb empty. The Roman guards who had been stationed to prevent theft reported that the disciples had stolen the body, a claim that was widely circulated but never substantiated. The resurrection of Jesus is also attested to by early non-Christian sources. The Roman historian Tacitus mentioned the crucifixion of Jesus and the spread of the Christian message, while Josephus, a Jewish historian, recorded that Jesus' disciples reported seeing him alive after his death. These sources, though not endorsing the resurrection, confirm that the event was widely known and discussed in the 1st century. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence related to the resurrection is the Nazareth inscription, a marble slab with a Greek inscription dating to the 1st century AD. The inscription is an imperial edict that imposes the death penalty for anyone who steals a body from a tomb. The edict especially mentions stone-sealed tombs, which were common in Judea, but not in other parts of the Roman Empire. Scholars have suggested that the Nazareth inscription may have been a response to the rumors surrounding Jesus' empty tomb. The edict reflects the Roman authorities' concern about the spread of the resurrection story and their attempt to prevent similar claims in the future. The inscription is consistent with the gospel account of the Roman guards being bribed to spread the story that Jesus' disciples had stolen his body. Now, over the centuries, various alternative explanations for the resurrection have been proposed. Some suggest that Jesus did not actually die on the cross, but merely fainted and later revived in the tomb. However, this theory is historically implausible, as Roman crucifixion was a brutal and lethal form of execution, and the Romans took great care to ensure that those crucified really were dead. Others propose that the disciples experienced hallucinations or visions of Jesus after his death, leading them to believe he had risen. However, this explanation fails to account for the empty tomb and the willingness of the disciples to die for their belief in the resurrection. Also, it is impossible from a medical perspective that 500 people have the same hallucination at the same time. Another theory is that the resurrection story was a later myth created by the early Christians community. However, the early and widespread testimony of the resurrection, as well as the willingness of eyewitnesses to die for their belief, makes this theory unlikely. And again, it doesn't explain the empty tomb. One of the most detailed accounts of Jesus' post resurrection appearances is found in the Gospel of Luke, which describes an encounter between Jesus and two disciples on the road to Emmaus. The disciples, initially unaware of Jesus' identity, walked with him and discussed the recent events in Jerusalem. It was only when Jesus broke bread with them, communion, that they recognized him, after which he vanished from their sight. The location of Emmaus has been debated by scholars, but the most plausible candidate is a site near Hubeibeba, approximately 60 stadia, about 6 miles from Jerusalem. This location aligns with the Gospel description and has archaeological evidence of a first century town. After his resurrection, Jesus appeared to his disciples in Galilee and gave them the Great Commission, instructing them to spread his message to all nations and baptize new believers. The location of this event is traditionally associated with the Mount Arbel, a prominent mount near the Sea of Galilee. Following the Great Commission, Jesus led his disciples to the Mount of Olives near Bethany, where he ascended into heaven. The ascension is described in the Gospel of Luke and Acts, and the site has been venerated by Christians since the early centuries of the church. So the burial, tomb, and resurrection of Jesus are central to Christian belief and have been supported by historical and archaeological evidence. The empty tomb, the post resurrection appearances, and the early Christian testimony all point to the reality of the resurrection as a historical event. While alternative explanations have been proposed, none adequately account for the evidence as well as the resurrection itself. The resurrection of Jesus is not only a cornerstone of Christian theology, but also an event that has shaped the course of history. The willingness of the early disciples to die for their belief in the resurrection, the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, and the enduring impact of Jesus' message all testify to the profound significance of this event. Now, after we have studied enough to prove the reliability and authenticity of the Bible, especially the four Gospels and the historical truth about the existence of life and crucifixion of Jesus Nazareth, I would like to finish our series with a serious question for you to think about, which is, who was Jesus really? How do you react when someone tells you he is God? Many have done that throughout history or claimed it. And that wasn't a problem because back there were many gods, fake gods, none, not real gods. But Jesus, however, claimed that he was the only God, the one true God of the universe. Jesus was a Jew. The Jewish conception of God was absolutely unique, unlike that of any other culture. Jesus firmly believed that there is only one God and he alone is perfect. Excuse me, Jews firmly believe that there is only one God and he alone is perfect, all powerful, all knowing, uncreated ruler of the world and ruler of all things. He is without beginning or end, and he alone related and sustains the universe. He is without limits and he has no competition. Problem is, Jesus claimed all of that above for himself. And that caused problems because nowhere in Jewish literature was this concept found, which is God becoming man. So now here raises the question to the identity crisis that Jesus raised by claiming he is God. So, who is Jesus? If he was not God, then how are we possibly explain his unprecedented claims? He was certainly not crazy, joking, or lying. So let's consider five other explanations. Maybe, first, maybe Jesus was misunderstood. Perhaps he never claimed to be God, but the historical evidence says otherwise. Centuries before Jesus, God revealed himself to Abraham as the I am. And Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. His Jewish audience knew very well that he said that he is equal to God, and that's why they wanted to stone him to death. And when Jesus identified himself as the Son of Man, according to the prophecies of Daniel, Jesus claimed to be the pre existent ruler and judge of the universe, i.e., God. That is why they condemned him to death. So Jesus was not misunderstood. To the Jews, his claim to be God was unmistakable. So this explanation fails. Second, maybe Jesus was a legend. The first centuries after the real Jesus lived, his followers invented the idea that Jesus was God. So question, is this valid? Is this added centuries later, or first Christians believed that Jesus was God? Early historical and Christian writers prove that Jesus was God, like, for example, given Ignatius, Irenaeus, Dement, Justin Martyr, Paul, Polycarp, and so on. They wrote things like Jesus, who is our God, or both God and man, or not a mere man, but was God. So the idea of Jesus of Nazareth was God or legend was not invented later by centuries, but actually it is true. First century early Christians believed Jesus was God. So this explanation fails also. Third, maybe Jesus was a clever political strategist. He claimed to be God in order um, to let the Jews fight against the Romans. However, in Jewish culture, claiming equality with God was not a good idea. In fact, it was a crime punishable by death. Jesus clearly stated that he was not a politician, and the Roman Empire clearly found him not guilty. So again, this explanation also fails. Fourth point, but it is plausible that the historical Jesus never even existed. No. In addition to the eyewitnesses' testimony of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, also multiple Greek Roman historians like Lucian, Celsus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, Josephus, the Talmud, all of them wrote about the existence and proved the existence of Jesus, who is called the Christ. In fact, there's as much documentary evidence of Jesus as there is for Julius Caesar. That is why the vast majority of New Testament scholars affirm that Jesus was truly a historical figure and he claimed to be God, and his disciples thought about him as God and they believed in him as their God. So this explanation fails. So explanation 1 to 4 fails, but for the open-minded, however, there's another option to consider. Maybe, just maybe, Jesus was who he claimed to be. Unlike the others, this explanation fits perfectly with the historical data. But it has one problem. It is not safe. If Jesus actually is God in flesh, then ultimately your life is not your own life. Then it means your true life can be found only in Him. And that is why Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abuna. I think we'll have a lot of Do you have any questions? Or anyone would like to discuss any of the points or any of the proofs that Father has just mentioned? Go ahead, Vat.
Makarios, some people says that Jesus come in India 11th and 12th century. Is it correct or not? In his early age, Jesus come to India, 12th or 13th century.
Yes. So thank you, Vashu, for your. Can I ask you to mute your mic? So thank you. Yeah. So Vashu, yeah. So there's an explanation or theory that goes that Jesus spent his childhood in India, where he learned the teachings of Buddha, the enlightened one. But this is false on many occasions, on many aspects. First thing, there are no historical evidence or manuscripts or writings supporting this idea, either in Europe or in Asia or anywhere else in the world. So this claim is wrong from this point of view. And also, the Bible states that when he was 12 years old, he had his, or 13 years old, he had his bar mitzvah, which is a Hebrew word. Bar means son, mitzvah meaning law. So bar mitzvah meaning son of law, where he's an adult according to Jewish law. He's now able to speak for himself, and he entered the Jewish temple, where he sat with the elders, Jews, and he discussed with them various Old Testament prophecies and writers. So if Jesus would have spent his time in India, this passage in the Bible wouldn't exist, but it does exist. So it shows that Jesus actually was in Jerusalem when he grew up in Nazareth. And this is also confirmed that when Jesus was talking with the Jewish leaders in Hebrew instead of Aramaic, because this Aramaic was the language of the poor people, but Hebrew was language for the scholars. Um, they asked, how do you know Hebrew? Where did you learn Hebrew? Because we know you. We know your mother Mary. We know your father Joseph. We know you are the carpenter, the son of Joseph the carpenter. So, being in Jerusalem, or especially Nazareth, Galilee, and the Jewish elders and scholars and the Pharisees and the Sadducees knowing Jesus means that they know him from early when he was a child in the temple, as again after his bar mitzvah. So this means the Jesus grew up in Jerusalem. That is why the elders, the Jewish leaders, knew Jesus, and they knew exactly who he was, who his father was, and who his mother and relatives were. Another point is that there is no any sources within the Bible indicating that Jesus went to India. So in our points of view, there's no evidence within the Bible, outside of the Bible, and also the Bible itself state that Jesus was in Jerusalem when he was a child, and again, according to the Jews elders, knowing him exactly who he was, proving that he lived among them in the Jewish community until he grew up. The very reason why there's very less accounts of Jesus' childhood in the Bible is because the Bible is not a historical book. It's the book of salvation, and therefore, because it doesn't really matter that much for your salvation, how Jesus spent his childhood in Jerusalem. That is why it's not mentioned his childhood, but it is mentioned his ministry and the 3.5 years of his ministry, his miracles, his teachings, everything, because this is very important for your salvation. Because the Bible is the book of salvation, not just a historical book.
Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. Any other questions? Of course, I will send you all the scripts that you need or you wish for. It will be a pleasure for me.
if any of the claims or any of the proofs that Abuna has just shared with us is not convincing for any of you or is not clear for any of you, you can feel free to raise your hands and ask any question before we leave. Okay, so thank you, Abuna. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
your
you.
attendance and for your concentration, for your time. I'm looking forward to have you in the rest of the programs, God willing.
Thank you for having me and wish you all the best and God bless you. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Bye
Thanks,
bye.
Abuna. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Bye.